Heat Check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa. Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Connor Hope, joined by another Heat Checker, our very own bracketologist extraordinaire and Big East expert, Lukas Harkins. Lukas, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Churning through these previews. The Big East, last is certainly not least. Lots of great teams to talk about today. Before we get into teams, because I know especially at the top, there are a ton of teams that look really good. Mm-hmm. But what struck me about the Big East this year is maybe even more than some of these other conferences, maybe even more than the Big 12, because of some of the teams the Big 12's taking in. The Big East, in terms of percentage of the conference, looks to be perhaps the deepest conference in the country. What are your thoughts on what fans, maybe not necessarily specific teams, but like what fans can expect from the conference as a whole?
Yeah, I think the conference is loaded. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, like we won't get into who's been great, who's going to be great at the top, but that's true. I mean, they're great at the top, and in the middle of the pack's pretty good. I think the league's probably 8, 9 deep of teams that are going to compete for NCAA tournament bids this season, and that's probably a Georgetown, Butler, DePaul bottom three that's going to be tricky to really work their way into the mix, at least with how things look on paper coming into the year. But those teams, at least Georgetown and Butler, should be pretty improved from last year. DePaul might be in that boat too. And I think the league's bottom got better, the league's top got better, and the middle of the pack is still pretty darn good.
So when looking at because I know the preseason polls came out, preseason all conference teams came out. One thing that struck me, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is that the defending national champions, obviously they lose two really key players, the Huskies do, but they were tabbed third in the conference, no first place votes. And Donovan Clingan, who is projected to be a lottery pick in this year's draft, or this upcoming draft, second team all conference, not a first team tab. They only have, I believe, no, they have two. Alex Caravan made an honorable mention, but only two players named to the all conference team. What are your thoughts on UConn, and why do you think maybe the coaches are a little bit lower on them than some of the media who still have them in the top 5, top 6 in the country?
Yeah, for me, I think Marquette, Creighton, and UConn are all preseason top 10 teams. It's kind of a toss-up of 1A, 1B, 1C, to me at least. But you're right, they didn't get a first-place vote in the Big East. And I do think they got a first-place vote in the AP poll, which is always an interesting conundrum. You're picked first in the country, but no one's picking you first in your own league. But I think it's a balance of just they have so many new pieces coming in. Like, how is the freshman class going to gel with what they have? How does Cam Spencer fit with what they already have coming back? And Clingan is, as much as he's a known in the minutes that he played last season, he's an unknown as far as playing a much bigger role than he did last year. When you look at a Creighton team that brings back its anchor and Ryan Kalkbrenner, still brings back Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman. You look at Marquette, who brings back the player of the year in the conference, and Tyler Kolek and anchors around him, and Iguodaro and Joplin. And there's a lot to like. And Cam Jones, there's a lot to like with the depth of those two teams in particular. Do I think have a safer floor coming into the year, even though I think the ceilings of all three teams are pretty equal?
So, looking at this UConn roster, obviously one of the biggest things that might need to be monitored, I don't know if you have any more information on this, is just Donovan Clingan already dealing with a foot injury during the offseason. But expectations are he steps in to start in place of the departing Sanogo. Cam Spencer, elite 3-point shooter, isn't Jordan Hawkins, but can shoot the ball well enough. Tristan Newton will run the show at the point. We've seen what Alex Caravan can do. One question I have is that, and all season, I mean, it almost became he was so underrated or underappreciated that he became almost overappreciated, is Andre Jackson is not an easy player to replace for any team, but especially for what he did for UConn in the
that's Milwaukee Buck Andre Jackson. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for those listening and not watching on YouTube, Lucas just held up a Milwaukee Bucks mug while I was talking about Andre Jackson. But what are your expectations in terms of the way that UConn will play or how they replace a guy like Jackson? Because I know in the Almanac's preseason starting five, you've got freshman Stephen Castle playing that 3 spot. Your expectations aren't that a freshman's going to step in and have the same, they might provide a higher ceiling. They might provide more offense maybe than Jackson did, but certainly not in the same way that Jackson was the ultimate glue guy in college basketball this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the thing that Castle does at least is he gives some of that similar 6'6", really big playmaker on offense. That Jackson was kind of, I think he got really heralded for his defense, and deservedly so, but was a better playmaker than I think a lot of people give credit for. I think Castle helps out in that capacity, and Cam Spencer also gives them more secondary playmaking alongside Newton. So I think the playmaking on offense is there. As far as defense gets, I think that's probably where the jump from Sonogo being a good defender to Klingon being at his best, one of the best 5 probably post defenders in the entire country. And a reason why he's projected to be in the lottery next year is how well he defends in the paint as a shot blocker. So I think that the difference there defensively is a little bit less on the perimeter, but more in the paint.
And it seems like youth is going to be a huge factor this year for UConn. They have 3 seniors, Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, as mentioned, and then Hassan Jara is also a senior. So their backcourt is really experienced, really senior laden. The only other 2 that seem to be poised to be in the rotation that are not freshmen are going to be Caravan and Klingon, redshirt sophomore.
Yep.
I'm not a huge recruiting guy. Like, I don't necessarily watch these kids coming out of high school unless they're going to the Pac-12 or the WCC or whatnot. And then I'll start to watch that, tape for some of these top freshmen, right before the season starts. But what can we expect from those freshmen? Outside, I know you mentioned Castle, but it sounds like Solomon Ball, Jalen Stewart, Jaden Ross all have an opportunity to play some big minutes for UConn.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. So, I think Castle is probably the guy that's definitely going to have, the biggest impact in year 1. I think he brings most of that ability to play. I think he'll start. He's probably a guy that has, NBA draft level hype coming into this year, and he's probably the only one that's going to see those starter level minutes. And as you hit on it, though, like there's experience depth in the backcourt, and I think that's where it's a little bit trickier to see Solo Ball move into a role, like when he's going to have to jump over Jara, Cam Spencer, Tristan Newton, so he'll play a little bit less there. And I think that when like the other positions, I think it really comes down to a lot of Castle at the 3, because the front court, even if you want to play Jalen Student, Jaden Ross there, like Alex Carabin, quite frankly, the fact he didn't win Big East Freshman of the Year still kind of comes back at me as a surprise. Cam Whitmore, obviously a fantastic player, but Alex Carabin probably had the best all-around season in terms of health and production for UConn last year as a freshman. He's going to play a ton, and Klingon's going to play a ton. Like, I think what the freshmen need to do is they kind of just need to be okay unless an injury happens. And if an injury happens, UConn's probably going to need a big jump, or they're going to be in trouble anyways.
So you mentioned Marquette and Creighton got the first place votes. I want to touch on Marquette first, right? They get 7 first place votes. They're picked to finish first in the coaches poll. They got the preseason player of the year, 2 All Big East second team preseason picks. They were, an injured hand away from making the second weekend last year. And they are part. That rematch is my national championship projection: Michigan State against Marquette. Everyone points to Shaka Smart can't get it done, right? He hasn't made the second weekend since he was at VCU. But this team is really good, right? And a lot of it is going to be put on Kolek, but Cam Jones is the leading returning scorer, not Kolek. Kolek is truly that pure point guard. Yeah. Sell me, or not me, because I have them in my national championship game, but sell people on why Marquette is the number 1 team in the Big East over UConn heading into this season, and why we should trust them to make a deeper run in the tournament than maybe history would have faith in Shaka Smart.
Let me just start by, as a lifelong Wisconsin fan, how difficult a question this is for me to answer, truthfully and honestly. It's tough, but I'll try to keep my own biases out of it. They're loaded. They're loaded, man. I mean, Tyler Kolek is as rock solid of a point guard as their country. You mentioned Cam Jones. He got that wiggle in the backcourt. He's a really good shooter. The 36% he hit from three last season doesn't really go to show just how great a shooter he is, and he'll probably lead the team in scoring again. Also, Iguodaro is one of the most versatile bigs in the country. 12, 6, 3, and a block and a half last year. There aren't many guys 6'11" doing that kind of stuff. They got a sophomore class that I think is ready to kind of take a jump, and all those guys are probably going to come off the bench. Whether that's Chase Ross, Sean Jones, Ben Gold, you're already like Stevie Mitchell and David Joplin also are probably going to jump into the starting full time, and that's 8 deep. That's all played. Well, that's all played at least 8 minutes a game for a team that was really, really good last year and won the Big East, and not just won the Big East, but won the Big East by games. I think the difference, obviously, Max Prosper is going to be tough, but I mean, I've been a David Joplin fan since he basically started high school because he went to my high school. So I think he's going to really be able to step into that role. I think he's a really good scorer at the 4. I think the question is who kind of replaces Joplin as he replaces Omax. I think that's where that sophomore class is going to need to come to play. But this group brings back so much cohesion from a team that was really good that it's really hard to not pick them. Honestly, picking them to not win the league is kind of insulting, I would say, even though I might be higher on Creighton. Anything but picking Marquette first in the league based on what they did last year in the regular season and what they bring back they're the best team on paper.
Yeah, and last year, I mean, it was weird because you watched them play defense, and it seemed like the metrics didn't match what you were seeing on the court at times in terms of, how uncomfortable they made opposing offenses at times. I know their defense, I think, was the slowest paced defense in quotes in the country last year. Just didn't, no one could find good shots against them, but it didn't translate. It translated into the 43rd ranked defense on KenPom, I think.
Yeah,
but their offense was really good. So it sounds like you trust Joplin to step into that Omax role. Would it be Ben Gold then in the Joplin role?
I think that's probably right. I think they'll go to Ben Gold, probably needing to be the front court depth in that spot because Chase Ross can play a little bit up, but mostly he's on the wing. So I think it'll probably be Ben Gold that takes that step, and I think that he showed some good flashes last year. He's got good size, 6'11". He can stretch it out to 3-point range. I think there's some good stuff there that can kind of grow into another year, especially as he plays behind a guy like Iguodaro who does so many different things on the floor that kind of no matter what Gold brings, he's kind of a change of pace up there. Because Iguodaro is not going to stretch the floor out to 3. Gold will. Iguodaro will block shots and create for others. I think there's a good mix of what they're going to get in the front court when they switch to kind of a real different change of pace.
And you mentioned, and I agree with you. I don't know if I have UConn and Marquette 1-2 in some order, but it's hard to ignore the starting 5, or at least 4 players in the starting 5 for Creighton offensively. You've got Trey Alexander and Ryan Kalkbrenner, who are both first team preseason All Big East. Baylor Shireman, I believe, is second team preseason All Big East. And then Stephen Ashworth was one of the hottest names of guards in the transfer portal. Kind of, that playmaker at Utah State now coming over to Creighton. What are your concerns with this Creighton squad? And obviously, if you have them in the top 3 in the Big East, there's not a lot to be concerned about. You said you have them in the top 10 nationally. But
I have top 1 in the Big East.
Oh, you have Creighton 1?
Yeah.
So you are.
I'm buying. Yeah, I said it in my article.
You're disrespecting Marquette, as you said.
Let me pull up my very first sentence of my Big East preview this year for the Marquette section. I understand this number 2 ranking contributes to the problem, but Marquette is being underrated coming into the season, at least in terms of discourse regarding Big East favorites. It's true. I'm disrespecting Marquette by putting them 2 too. But man, this Creighton team, I love this Creighton team. I think it's fantastic. Trey Alexander is stepping into kind of that bigger playmaker role, probably running mostly at the point. Stephen Ashworth gives them an awesome playmaker next to him. Baylor Shireman's another really plus playmaker. I think every year that they've had Ryan Kalkbrenner, basically they've been a top 25 defense. That's going to stay this year. I think he's just that good. He's an anchor in there. Out of all the Big East teams since they moved to 10 teams in 2013-14, only Nova has more wins in the Big East and a higher winning percentage than Creighton. That's all been with McDermott on the sidelines. They bring in Isaac Trout and bring back Mason Miller to shoot at the floor. I mean, this reminds me of those teams that McDermott had a few years ago that were just extremely potent offensively. I think they have that kind of offense that year, but those teams didn't have a Ryan Kalkbrenner. This one does. Like, I just think there's so much here, kind of up and down the roster. Like Frederick King's a solid backup big. Isaac Trout's going to get minutes of the 4. Francisco Farabello can shoot better than he did last year. I think this starting 5 is up there with the best in the country when you go Alexander, Ashworth, Shireman, probably Mason Miller, and Kalkbrenner. That 4 at least is elite.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's I think my biggest concern. I have Creighton 8 nationally. My biggest concern is just, you've presumably got Mason Miller stepping into a much bigger role than he had last year. You've got a couple of redshirt freshmen, Farabello, who also was not in a huge role, and Frederick King. Like, to me, there's so much uncertainty with their depth, and not necessarily that I doubt their depth or I don't trust it, but when you look at the other 2 teams that are in this conversation, right? Marquette, obviously they're starting 5, even though you have David Joplin moving into a bigger role, it's not as big a leap in terms of the role he's taking on. Ross and Jones had rotational roles last year for Marquette. And so you have the depth, maybe not necessarily as proven, but still proven. And then with UConn, it's Giara coming in. That they have a lot of freshmen too.
Yes, but highly touted freshmen with strong reputations. So, I just think the thing with Creighton for me though is like Alexander, Ashworth, Shireman, Kalkbrenner not only are proven to be really good starting players, all of them, and that includes Ryan Kalkbrenner, are 30 plus minutes a night guys.
Yeah.
Like you can get 35 from them. Like Ryan Kalkbrenner is his ability to block shots and protect the rim and be as impactful defensively as he is without fouling and play over 30 minutes a night is what makes him so special. Like there's a lot of guys who block shots in 20 minutes a game, but their impact isn't felt for the other 20. Like Kalkbrenner's out there super impactful for 32 plus minutes a game last season. And like his ability to just stay on the floor for that makes Creighton just kind of constantly good on the defensive end with him out there. And I think that it's not just that they have 4 top level guys. They have 4 top level guys that are going to play over 3/4 of every game they play.
Yeah. And it seems like too, that you kind of have to respect all of them out on the perimeter when they're on offense, right?
Well, certainly Alexander, Ashworth, Shireman, and Miller. Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Kalk, you can leave a little bit, but he can make some shots for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can leave Kalkbrenner a little bit. Only took 19 of them, but like making 6 of 19, it at least makes you have to kind of account for him on the perimeter. Where a big like Klingon, we haven't necessarily seen that that level of like he gets out on the perimeter, you're probably sagging off to help on any of the drives. Whereas Kalk, you kind of have to be aware that he's there. So I think Creighton probably has the best offense in the conference. My question is just the depth, but it sounds like you don't have the same concerns, or at least
I do if any of those 4 or 5 get hurt. Yes, but but I don't want to wish that upon anything in a preseason discussion. It's a concern, yes, but also like if they're healthy, they're phenomenal.
So outside of this top 3, the next team I want to talk about, it might be safe to say that it's the most polarizing team in the country right now, or at least top 5 most polarizing teams in the country in terms of.
You could kind of go a few directions here in the Big East. I'm intrigued where you are going.
I'm going to go a team where we have seen a lot of people claim that if their old head coach was still the head coach, it's easily a top 5, top 10 team.
So we're going to the main line.
We're going to the main line. We're going Villanova. Very, very talented roster. And I mentioned there are people out there who, like, if it wasn't Kyle Neptune at the reins, this is a top 5, top 10 team easy, probably preseason.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily fair. I think it's if Jay Wright is the coach, it's a top 5 or 6 team nationally. I don't know if it's not Kyle Neptune as much as it's Jay Wright was that dude.
Yeah. Yes. That's fair. That's kind of what I meant. But look, you've got a really talented starting 5 in Moore, Bamba, Hart, Burton, Dixon. Then off the bench, Mark Armstrong, Longino, Lance Ware's coming in. Chris Arcidiacono, who I know people love to hate on, is their 9th guy
I refuse to let you get this far without saying Brendan Hausman, who I think is still just fantastic.
Yeah.
He will get there.
Who plays more, he or Arch?
Probably Arch. But I'm not sure. It's a hot take, but I'm not convinced there's a better shooter in the conference than Brendan Hausman.
What did he shoot last? 43%, 42, something like that.
43, yeah. He's an elite shooter. I saw him several times coming out of high school when he came up here and when he was down in Texas. I watched some games. He's a phenomenal talent on offense, and I will stand by that until his minutes go up. I think that he's gonna have a breakout. One of these next 3 years, he will have a breakout season. I stand by it.
And they obviously you lose Caleb Daniels, you lose Cam Whitmore.
Yep. You lose Brandon Slater.
But you bring in Tyler Burton. He put the ball in the hoop for Richmond last year. TJ Bamba, Hakeem Hart had really big roles at high major conferences.
Yeah.
And Lance Ware didn't have the biggest role, but he's also played in a high major conference. So like the jump for those 3 shouldn't be what some of these other, and we were talking about the Big 12 where
the jump from Richmond's not that big.
Yeah, even the jump from Richmond. But like we were talking about the Big 12 where there's a lot of these teams that have players making leaps from like Delaware and stuff where you're unsure what's going to happen. That shouldn't be the case here. You kind of know what you're going to get from those players. But I think
there are 5 pretty much guaranteed double-digit scorers on this team.
Right. And I think the one that, their season is going to go the way he goes, but if there's one player in this conference outside of Kalkbrenner, Klingen, and Kolek, like not on those top 3 teams to win Conference Player of the Year,
it's Justin Moore. Yeah, it's Justin Moore.
Yeah. So,
it's so easy to forget just how dynamic and good he is.
Right. He came back last year, never looked quite right until like later in the season. But, before he got hurt, he was really dynamic as a guard. And so is it just Kyle Neptune that's the reason why they're not discussed in the same breath as like the other 3? Because you put this roster just blindly without a coach in front of it, and you've got to love it. Like you've got to, maybe not number 1 in the conference, but at least in the discussion with those top 3 for a top 10, top 15 type team in the country.
Yeah, for one, they're preseason top 15 for me. But I think they're by themselves in a tier. Like I think if you're putting Creighton, Marquette, and UConn in tier 1, Nova is tier 2 for me. Like that's the whole tier. And the Big East rankings for me, I think they just are tier 2 on their own. And I think that's just because they're coming off a year that wasn't as successful. Like whether that's like they weren't healthy. Obviously, Justin Moore missed a bunch of time. Cam Whitmore missed some time. They started, I think, 2-5 without either one of them playing. From that point forward, they were pretty solid. I think for starters, it's Jay Wright's not coaching, and there's more of a question mark there. And for 2 is just they're coming off a season where like Creighton and Marquette were really good last year. Creighton made the Elite 8, Marquette won the league, UConn won the national title. Like those 3 things are pretty hard to argue with, being in the top 3 as opposed to a team that didn't make the NCAA tournament. I think putting Nova in that top tier in the preseason, whether or not it's reasonable based on the roster, is a different argument. But I think it's a little bit even disrespectful to the top 3 that proved so much last year that coming into this year that they should be a tier ahead of where Nova is.
That's fair. We talked about youth, especially for Creighton and UConn. this Nova team is old.
It's old, and it's got young guys. Like
Right.
Mark Armstrong and Brendan Hossen, like especially Armstrong, who played more minutes. Like both those guys were former top 75 recruits who are now sophomores.
But they're sophomores. We're not talking about freshmen coming in and trying to make that adjustment to the college game. We're
I'm
talking
saying
about yeah,
the guys that could be breakout guys for Nova, like real breakout candidates, like Hossen and Armstrong are real breakout sophomore candidates, and they're 6th and 8th in their depth chart, probably.
Yep.
Like that's if they have a breakout, like all of a sudden their bench is awesome too.
Right. And
even if they break out, they're not passing anybody in the starting 5. Like I think the best outcome for Mark Armstrong this year is the best 6 man in the conference. I don't think he can jump a Justin Moore or TJ Bamba, even if he has a great year, because those two guys are so good.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. They were 22nd in the preseason AP. I think it struck me who they were behind.
Yeah, it was lower than I thought.
They were behind USC, North Carolina, who are two teams that I think, I mean, they have just as many, if not more, question marks, right? Are we really trusting Hubert Davis with that North Carolina roster more than Neptune? Just because, I mean, Hubert Davis went on one run, had a terrible season last year. And that's where I think it struck me, is that they were lower than I think they probably should have been,
I agree,
given the roster. So you mentioned, which there are several, ways we could take polarizing teams.
Yeah.
The next one is a team
from Pennsylvania over to New York.
To New York. A team that some people are higher on than others, have one of the greatest coaches to ever do it.
Yeah.
And I think that is the source of not all of it, but a source of a lot of the hype for St. John's, is that you've got Patino coming in. He's bringing with him Jenkins from Iona, who was an excellent point guard for a winning program in Iona. You bring in Dingle from Penn, who, again, he scored 25 points per game or something like that for the Quakers last year. Aline from UConn, who national champion, now on your roster. And you still have Soriano, who's a double machine for St. John's. And RJ Lewis, I think, from UMass is also coming in.
Glenn Taylor from Oregon State.
Taylor. Yeah.
So it's a whole new roster.
It is it's a whole new roster. But
Simeon Wilcher comes in. Freddie Dunlap comes in as freshman. There's the whole rosters. It's Joel Soriano and a really good recruiting class at the mid-major All-Stars. Right.
And that's the thing I think is the difference between them and Villanova. I mean, obviously, Villanova has more continuity. Same coach, a lot of returning talent, but it is really Aline, Soriano, and then a bunch of guys who played really well at lower level conferences. What are your expectations for St. John's?
I have absolutely no idea what to expect. This could go any which direction. It really could. I really don't know what to expect. I've planted them in the middle of the Big East standings. I think they're a team that could exceed that. They could disappoint. They could be a top 15 team in the country. They could be nowhere near the top 25. I have no idea. What I've really come back to is they've got 7 guys who average double figures at their previous locations, which includes Joel Soriano at the high major level at the Big East. And they have arguably the best defensive coach in the country in Rick Pitino. It should work itself out. Whether it does in December or in February remains to be seen. But I think it should work itself out. And I think they're probably a pretty mid-tier NCAA tournament team. Somewhere in that 6 to 8 seed range, I'd think.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for me, because going into last year, and I think you were on the preseason Big East preview for this, where I was like, the Posh Alexander, Andre Curbelo experiment was going to be one of the most entertaining losing teams in the country. Because those two can lose with the best of them. But
hey. We're not going to say that about current Butler Bulldog Posh Alexander.
well, where do you have Butler ranked?
Shut up.
But I think this team, right? Like, there is an innate floor that you have just by having Pitino as coach, and then you bring in these players that, while they might not have the same ceiling that these other teams have because they are mid-major talents that outperformed their billing and played really well and are now playing in the Big East. I do think that having a Jenkins who knows the system, having a Soriano who's been there, done that in the Big East, having an Aline who has a national championship, knows what it takes to win, that can only provide a floor. And I agree with you. I think that floor is middle of the Big East. I think their ceiling's probably fourth.
Yeah,
but
I could probably, that says more about the top three than I think it does about St. John's too.
Yes, but I think they're one of those, like you said, like in that 25 to 35, 40 range in the country. They'll flirt with the top 25. I mean, if they get off to a hot start, they'll immediately be in the top 25.
Skyrocket. If they get hot, they will skyrocket. I don't think AP voters can get to their ballots fast enough if they get off hot.
Because they're what? They're like the fourth team out of the top 25. and with
one return.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're right behind UCLA, who has just as many question marks with their roster construction. But you look at their schedule, right? They start off with Stony Brook, then Michigan, but Michigan's in presumably a down year. North Texas, Dayton, or LSU. Like, they could feasibly, I don't know who's on the other side of their bracket in the Charleston Classic.
They could be top 15 by Thanksgiving.
Yeah. West Virginia, Holy Cross, Sacred Heart, Boston College, Fordham. They could enter that Xavier with like that Xavier game with like one or no losses and a top 15, top 20 billing. And we still won't know what to make of St. John's.
Yeah, like St. John's at UConn Christmas Eve could be a tremendously hyped battle, and I am here for it.
So I think, St. John's is going to be, people are going to hate them because it's Pitino. People are going to hate them because it's a full new roster. People are going to love them because it's Pitino. People are going to love them because they've got a bunch of mid-major all-stars.
People are going to hate them because they wear red in the league that you're only allowed to wear blue.
That's fair. So I'm going to save the next team. I think you put together the Almanac preseason standing rankings.
I just covered Butler. Rob did the rest.
So I'm going to... And you didn't work on the standings with okay.
Nope.
Well, I don't know who you have at 6, but I'm going to skip to who Doster had at 7. So we can talk about 6 and 9 for Doster.
I have Providence at 6, if that helps.
So yeah, we're skipping Providence.
Okay.
Going straight to Xavier. Sean Miller led Xavier to the Sweet 16, which is Sweet 16 Elite 8 is Sean Miller's sweet spot as a head coach. They lose Soleil Boom. They lose Colby Jones, Jack Nungy, Adam Kunkel. That's a pretty big hit. Do bring in Davian McKnight from Western Kentucky.
Yep.
Olivari from Rice. Again, a lot of really solid mid-major players. Usman from North Texas.
Yep.
I don't know what to make of this. This is the team that I don't know what to make of, because you don't even have, like, Desmond Claude and Jerome Hunter are coming back. I don't know if
Hunter's
Zach Freemantle is going to play this year.
Same with Hunter.
Yeah, the same with Hunter. I don't know how healthy either of those guys are. So Desmond Claude's the only one you're guaranteed to get back.
Yeah, Cam Kraft, right, Hunter, I guess, but yeah,
6 minutes per game for Cam Kraft last year.
He's at least someone back from last year's roster.
He's at least someone back, right? But it's those three. It's those two. Those three transfers, and then a lot of freshmen.
Yeah.
What are you making? And I don't know where you have Xavier. It's
7.
obviously not top half. 7?
Yep.
Why are they 7 for you? Is it just the weakness of 8 through 11, or is there something you like? Is it Sean Miller just being the
There's a
coach?
Sean Miller will figure it out factor in there. There's also, I
Yeah.
do think this backcourt's good. Like what he did, what Sean Miller and Xavier had with Sule Boom last year, I think was special. I'm not going to take
Hmm.
that away from like how good they developed Sule Boom and how good he played. But I also think that there's somebody who said that like Davion McKnight could step into a similarly impactful role. I think he's very
Hmm.
good at the point. Quincy Olivari gives them that kind of what they had in Adam Kunkel, like a high scoring mid major shooting guard who can really let it fly. I mean, Rice will let its guys shoot, and he hit him at a pretty high clip last year, upwards of 36%, 19 or so points a game. I think that he gives them a little scoring punch. And I think Des Claude is probably one of the top breakout candidates in the Big East. Like I think Donovan Klingon's obviously been the most hyped because he's going to be a lottery pick. But Claude is kind of that guy who could take a big step, I think, this year. And I think that's a really solid 1-2-3 punch that I think is going to be up there with one of the better backcourts in the conference, which I think will make up for what is a really questionable front court without Hunter and Fremantle, at least to be in that ahead of that bottom tier, I think.
So let's say we get to, and granted, we know, I mean, Hunter is, I think, as Doster put it, like he could be back week 2, he could be back January, he could never be back this season.
Yeah, I think
Zach,
Rothstein said it a few weeks ago that I think they're operating under the assumption neither Hunter nor Fremantle will play this season.
okay. So, and you still have them 7, but let's say they do come back mid-February, or early, mid-January, early March, just to have that discussion. Where does that put this team's ceiling compared to where you have them right now, which would be
Yeah, I
kind
mean,
of in between that top half and bottom half?
yeah, I think they move into that kind of that St. John's Providence tier.
Okay.
That's just behind
Hmm.
Nova. Like I think they're a tournament level team. I think they'll
Yep.
compete for a tournament bid regardless. I think this is a team that'll be in conversations in February.
Hmm.
But if they get that front court at any point, I think that'd be a huge boost to those hopes for sure. But right now they're going to need a lot out of Uzman, like a lot.
Yeah.
Because this
Can
league
Uzman do that, especially in this conference with the
with
bigs that
Klingon
they
and
have?
Kalkbrenner and Iguodaro and Soriano,
Soriano.
it's gonna be tough sledding for sure.
Yeah. So I know I said we skipped Providence. I want to talk about the Ed Cooley group now. Obviously, Cooley no longer the head coach for Providence. It's Kim English coming in for his
Yep.
first season. They lose Locke, they lose Crosswell, they lose Jared Bynum. They bring in 3 George Mason transfers.
Yep.
Um,
And Dual, who
you said
rocks.
you have them what?
And Dual, who rocks.
Yeah. You said you have them
6.
6th.
Yeah.
And the question I think people will have is how good can a team that can essentially George Mason plus Bryce Hopkins and Dual and Devin Carter be in this Big East?
Well,
Like,
for one, I think Carter, Dual, and Hopkins is an outstanding trio. Like
yeah.
that covered returning from Cooley. Now English did re-recruit Dual and get him back, and that he deserves tons of credit for that as well. But the Carter Dual Hopkins trio is really good, and Josh Oduro was a good player at George Mason. Like that's a proven guy who I think if it wasn't for like if he just if Oduro just entered the portal without like Kim English already being at a high major, he's gonna get high major attention. That's 16-8
Got it.
in a good league.
Yep.
Like I think that he's a guy that's a reasonable up transfer that you would have seen regardless. I don't think that's a reach, and I think there's some depth pieces here that have intrigue. Like Corey Fleur Jr. Is a guy who still has intrigue coming into his redshirt sophomore year. I think there's at the very least a really good trio of guys that are here, and then you add in Arturo and Ticket Gaines does some nice things as well. I think this is a pretty good team overall, and how it comes together, I think, will be kind of determining on what kind of steps Hopkins and Carter can still take because they took such big jumps last year. I mean, Bryce Hopkins is if Providence is going to take that leap into the upper half, like true upper half, that top 5, Hopkins is going to need to be in those player of the year conversations, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility either.
Right. And I think my biggest concern for this team is shooting, especially in what you presume to be the starting lineup, right?
Yeah.
Hopkins shot over 36% on 75-ish attempts last year, but you really don't have like the big ticket shooter in
Correct.
in that starting 5. Corey Floyd, Jaden Pierre,
You don't have
shot
no
high
lock this year.
percentages. Yeah.
You don't have no lock.
So how do they overcome what might be a lack of shooting efficiency from the perimeter?
I think Carter and Duval is an absolute lockdown defensive backcourt. For one, I think they're going to be phenomenal on that end. And Bryce Hopkins, kind of regardless of spacing around him, I think is going to get buckets.
Right.
I think that's where it just kind of comes from. It's just like there's enough. Like Ticken Gaines can hit some threes. Duval will hit some threes. Carter will hit some threes. When they come to the bench, Floyd and Pierre will hit some threes. And that's going to have to be enough because I think that that offense is going to come from Carter attacking the basket and Hopkins being kind of just that dude.
So we mentioned Ed Cooley's no longer there as the head coach. He has not left the conference, however.
No.
He's over at Georgetown. I know you mentioned Georgetown's in your bottom 3.
Yeah.
They lose Primo Spears. They lose Brandon Murray. But they bring in Jaden Epps from Illinois. They bring in John Styles from North Carolina. Masood from Kansas State. Brumbaugh from Texas. Like, they bring in high major talent to this roster. Lacking in depth. I don't know. Am I seeing this correctly? They have 9
scholarship players and 6 walk-ons.
Yeah. So obviously, if any of those, Supreme Cook, Masood, Styles, Epps, Heath, any of those guys go down, it's going to be tough sledding. I mean, it's going to be tough sledding already. They've got 2 guys who scored in double digits, 3 that scored over 9 points per game at their previous stops last year.
Yeah.
But so we don't need to talk about this year because I think this year is probably, I mean, it's the first year that Cooley's really there. What are your expectations for Georgetown under Ed Cooley? Because I know Ed Cooley in Providence was fantastic. And I don't know if that's just, it was the perfect fit for the 2 of them, or if Ed Cooley can harness what he had at Providence and rebuild a Georgetown program that really should be one of the top programs in the conference, just based on where it's located, the history behind it, and all of that. Like, what are your expectations down the road for this Georgetown team?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take very long.
Okay.
I don't think it's this year. I don't think it's going to take very long. I mean, and part of that is the era that we're in college basketball and the way Ed Cooley has succeeded at Providence. Like, he brought in Devin Carter last year, brought in Bryce Hopkins last year. I mean, his roster was so full of transfers last year at Providence. Gary Bynum was a transfer who came in. Noah Locke was a transfer that came in. Like, he kills it in the transfer portal, and he will kill it. And he's already done a really good job here. Like, Jaden Epps is a star addition. Like, John Styles and Masood are high major guys. Ron Brumbaugh was a top 150 recruit. Like, there's talent already coming in, and I think it's just a lack of depth that keeps them in the bottom tier for me. Because if anyone goes down, they could really hurt. They could really be hurting in a hurry, as you already mentioned. But the talent pool is rising, and I think it will continue in the next few years. I don't think it will take long for Cooley to get this team back into the upper half of the conference and contending for NCAA tournament bids and runs.
So I think the one team you have ahead of Georgetown, moving on, is...
I have Georgetown 10.
You have Georgetown 10, so 2 teams ahead
honestly,
of them.
I think they're probably 8th best talent-wise, but I'm just so concerned about their depth that I put them a little bit lower. That's all it is. I think that Jaden Epps is really good. Jay Heath's a talented guy. I think they're probably they're the team that I feel most confident in exceeding where I have them picked at 10th, but I'm just concerned with the depth.
Yeah. So, do you have Seton Hall at 8th then? Because I think you said Butler's in the bottom 3.
Yep.
Seton Hall last year, obviously, maybe not, I don't know if hype's the right word, but there was a lot of hope that Shaheen Holloway could come in and continue having Seton Hall at least where they were. They finished 6th in the Big East. They finished 10-10, but I think that was viewed by many as a disappointment for this team. Defense was there, and we know Shaheen Holloway is an excellent defensive coach. I think the hope was that he could harness what we saw from him, what we saw from St. Peter's offensively in their tournament run, which was a lot different and a lot more successful than the entire season for St. Peter's, and we just didn't see that. They lose Tyrese Samuel, they lose Ndefo, but they keep Kadari Richmond, they keep Dre Davis and Dawes. And what are your thoughts on this roster? Because that starting 5, if you include Adewusu and Hutchins Everett, looks decent on paper. Again, depth I have concerns with. I like Jaden Bediako, but I don't necessarily think he's a guy who you can reasonably rely upon in the Big East as like a 6th or 7th man. But he'll probably have to play big minutes behind Hutchins Everett at the 5. So what are your thoughts on this Seton Hall team?
I think it's better than I think it's been given some credit for. Like, I've seen a lot of people put them in the bottom 3, and I think they're a tier ahead of that Georgetown, Butler, DePaul group, and however order you put those 3 teams. I think they're a slight nudge ahead of that group. Like, I think their backcourt's good. I think Kadari Richmond, Almir Dawes, and Dylan Adewusu aren't just guys who've scored 9 a game in college. They've scored 9 a game in the Big East. I think that there's value in that, and their proven ability at that level. And the same goes for Dre Davis. They're old, 1 through 4. They're old. They've got guys who've scored. They've got guys who play defense. I think their offense is going to be better this season than it was last year. My question is, I think the defense takes a bit of a step back. No Samuel and Ndefo, I think, is a big jump in terms of, both Samuel and Ndefo were top 300 in block rate last year. Ndefo was top 100. I don't think Hutchins' effort really gives them that. And I don't think their front court is quite as good as it was last year as a result. I think their backcourt's solid enough. I think they'll score enough. I think their defense will take a little bit of a step back. Seton Hall hasn't finished 8th or worse in the Big East since 2014. And I think this is setting a pretty low floor. Even in a loaded Big East, I think the floor is higher than what Seton Hall's been given some credit for this offseason.
We'll move on to your alma mater. You said you have Butler. I think then I'm assuming you have Butler 9th, because if you have DePaul 9th, I would.
No, I have Butler 9. I have Butler 9, and only because of Georgetown's depth. I think Georgetown. If both Butler and Georgetown stay healthy, I'd put Georgetown ahead.
But Butler's an interesting case to me because you bring in Posh Alexander, as we mentioned, from St. John's, who the way he plays, it is really like he can spark your offense or he can kill it. And you don't really know what you're going to get. But behind him, I really liked DJ Davis. And every time I watched him live for UC Irvine, the way he played off of and with Dawson Baker at UC Irvine, the way he can shoot the hell out of the ball like that as a 2 guard for Thad Matta, I think you can rely on DJ Davis. And not, we've had questions about up transfers. In terms of what DJ Davis, I think, is going to be expected to do for this Butler team, I don't really have a ton of worry because
he's not going to have the ball. UC Irvine was better than Butler last year.
Right. But he's gonna shoot, and he's gonna shoot well, and shooting translates. And he shot over 40% last year for UC Irvine. I have no qualms about him. It'll be interesting to see Pierre Brooks in a bigger role than he had last year. Who else do they bring in? Jamil
Telfort from Northeastern. They bring in Andre Screen from Bucknell, Landon Moore from St. Francis, Pennsylvania.
Thank you for that. My biggest question, and granted, none of this roster screams tournament team, right? I mean, even just naming off those names, right? It doesn't scream tournament team. Biggest question mark for me is what do they do at 5, and how much can they rely on Jalen Thomas and I'm assuming Connor Turnbull at
Andre
the
Screen.
5?
Turnbull will play.
Andre Screen.
I think Turnbull will play almost exclusively the 4 this year.
Okay.
They've at least been grooming him to play the 4, basically exclusively.
Got it. So like for this Butler team to overachieve, what does Thad Matta have to do in year 2 to get that? And by overachieve, I mean like finish 6th in the conference.
It needs to be one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the conference.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there are the pieces here to be a good 3-point shooting team. Like DJ Davis, you mentioned, not only shot 40% at UC Irvine, he shoots 40% from like 28 feet. I mean, I was talking to someone on the staff a few weeks ago, and like their comment has still just like, it made me chuckle, and it still kind of stands out. They said DJ Davis is the kind of guy who wakes up and can drill one from his bed sheets. Like that.
And it's true. Like you watched UC Irvine play last year, and Dawson Baker could break down a defender and hit one in his face. But you watched DJ Davis play off the ball and get open looks, but they weren't like at the 3-point line, right? It was not necessarily logo shots, but like he could shoot from anywhere on the floor, and having that kind of alongside of Posh Alexander, I think helps Posh be a little bit better, right? He doesn't have he's always going to have that outlet.
Yep.
What is going to be the biggest struggle this year for Butler?
Yeah, I'll go back and continue the shooting thing and then jump into the struggles. Like, yeah, I think Davis is awesome. Pierre Brooks can theoretically be a good shooter. Jameel Tuffort's shot his best when he had Tyson Walker, an actual point guard at Northeastern, which he'll have again this season with Posh Alexander. Landon Moore shot 36% at St. Francis and had some, he, I think, is the most underrated addition for at least Butler, and one of the most underrated additions in the conference. He's as steady as it gets as a point guard. He had 25 at Miami. That's Miami at Florida, Final Four Miami. He had 18 at Butler last year. He had 15, 5, and 5, I think, against St. Bonaventure. He put up numbers against good teams last year. And Finley Bizjack's really is going to be a guy. Whether he's not a guy, whether there's a guy this year or he's a guy down the road, he's going to play a lot this season. He's one of Butler's highest rated recruits, and he's got a lot of stuff to his game. And Connor Turnbull is a really good shooter for the 4 too. So I think there's the threats to shoot, and this is a team that has Posh Alexander at the 1, Jameel at the 4, and Jalen Thomas at the 5. Those 3 give you some defensive principles to stand on. So I think it becomes how well they can score. That is kind of the necessary part. But you already hit on a little bit with the point of struggle, and I think that's the front court. I think the backcourt of Posh, DJ, Landon Moore, Finley Bizjack is a pretty good group. And as those guys can play 1 through 3, and Brooks will play the 3 pretty much primarily. But it's Jameel Telfort's going to play the 4 at 6'7", and that's going to be undersized at times. Like, he's physically built and definitely ready to be a guy that can jump to the Big East, but he's still going to be undersized in some positions. Jalen Thomas is going to be, Jalen Thomas is going to give it 4 inches to Donovan Clingan. That's a size and how well he can stay on the floor, whether with foul trouble or with, he played 20 minutes a game last year. Andre Screen, the jump from Bucknell to Butler is a huge one. Like, he's big and 7'1", and that advantage at Bucknell is going to be larger than it is at Butler. I think it's really that 5 spot where it's going to be Jalen Thomas, Andre Screen, and freshman Bowden Kapke are probably going to play all the minutes to 5. And they're in a league that we already talked about with, I forget who we were talking about at the time, but the conference is just loaded at the 5. I think
we were talking about, who was it?
Xavier without Fremantle and Hunter.
Yeah.
I think Butler's gonna have a hard time defending that 5 spot consistently, and that's gonna be a problem. I think they're gonna need to both shoot the lights out with a roster that probably only starts 3 shooters because Alexander and Thomas aren't shooting threats. So they're gonna need to really shoot the lights out at the 2 through 4 spots. And they're gonna need to be pretty rock solid on defense. I think, but as you mentioned, it's a tough road in terms of one guy who has a double-digit scoring season at the high major level on the whole roster, and that's a guy who is most known for his defense and then for his passing before you get to scoring even.
So last team, we don't need to spend too much time on them. Just maybe some quick thoughts. DePaul brings in high major transfers in name. But you look at this roster, and to me, as someone who covers the West Coast, like immediately seeing that you're probably going to have Mac Etienne starting or playing a majority of the minutes at the 5.
Yeah.
Like, I like Caleb Murphy and Chico Carter in the backcourt, but maybe. But outside of, and Deshaun Nelson at the 4,
Nelson
but like
can play. I love Deshaun Nelson. Dude can play.
But Mac Etienne starting or playing, 25 plus minutes at the 5 alone is enough to make me uneasy, let alone relying on, an Elijah Fisher or a Jaden Henley or, some of these other guys to have to step up. Because this is a team that has Deshaun Nelson, and that's it in terms of players that averaged double-digit scoring last year.
Yeah.
What is the ceiling, I guess, is my only question for this DePaul team, because obviously I think everyone's going to pick them to finish last. What's the ceiling?
Getting out of the double digits.
Okay.
Like if they get out of the bottom 2, like they can get into that 8-9 spot. I think that's a pretty successful season.
And is that going to be DePaul, or is that going to be more like
a Butler?
It doesn't work out for Georgetown and Butler. Yeah.
I don't know. I think Elijah Fisher could kind of really blossom into a big role. We'll see how that. Like he was a really, really highly touted recruit out of high school who I believe reclassified. So this would like really be age-wise his freshman year, what you'd expect. I think he could have a big opportunity. Deshaun Nelson's good. We're gonna have a healthy Caleb Murphy this year. He missed a lot of time last year. That can hopefully make a difference. So I think that there's some stuff here, but I think that there's nobody more familiar with being picked at the bottom of the league than DePaul is. So like at least they have the mindset of knowing what they're going into. Eventually there will be a breakthrough year. It's just inevitable in my opinion. Like it's going to happen at some point. I don't think it's this year, but sometime it will happen.
Yeah, and it's fun it's fun and easy to make fun of DePaul. It is not an easy job.
No.
So, I don't envy Stubblefield. And has he been the greatest coach? No, but I do think that this DePaul team shows fight, at least, which is more than you can say for some other teams that are at the bottom of their conferences. I'm talking about the Oregon States and the Louisvilles of the world, right?
God, could you imagine saying that 10 years ago?
Right. Well, I'll leave my Louisville fight comments for another time. But okay, so we love to do this at the end of every podcast episode. The one bold prediction for the conference as a whole. It could be a player prediction, a team prediction. I know we had Duke Better come on for the ACC and say that 5 coaching seats are going to turn over. Like just one bold prediction for this conference between now and April.
Yeah, I'm going to give 2 because one of them is just going to be called biased when I say it. So for one, Finley Bizjack could compete for Big East Freshman of the Year. I think the conference has a lot of good freshmen, notably at UConn in particular, but I think he's going to get a lot of minutes, and I think he can really play. And he'll put up some good numbers as a scorer with his ability to score at all 3 levels. I think that he'll put up good numbers at Butler this year. As for a more overarching, I think Nova's going to spend a lot of weeks in the top 10. And
yeah,
I think Nova's like, if there's any team outside of the top 15 preseason that's going to win the national title, that's the team.
Yeah, mine was going to be connected to that. I think, and this is an either or, but I think you either see Kyle Neptune win Big East Coach of the Year or Justin Moore win Big East Player of the Year. And because I think Nova's going to overperform what their expectations are.
Yeah.
And it's either going to be because Justin Moore is putting up 18 to 20 points per game, 4 to 5 assists, and being that do everything point guard that Nova needs, or it's because Kyle Neptune says, I had one rough year. Here's who I am. I learned from the best. I'm going to be one of the best, and puts them into that top 3 conversation. So I think my bold prediction is either or. You're either going to see player of the year or coach of the year go to Villanova. Because I agree with you. I think they're going to be a top 10, top 15 team for most of the season. Once we get past like the Thanksgiving and people start to realize that, this Nova team is pretty stacked, pretty good, pretty experienced. So, well, that's going to do it for us. For my co-host, Lukas Harkins, I'm Connor Hope. We will talk to you next time. We're going to have games. The games are coming
real
next
basketball,
week.
Man.
Real basketball. None of these secret scrimmage box scores or, charity events are fun, but
real standings affecting basketball games.
Right. None of these box scores that just say doesn't count on them. We're going to have real standings affecting basketball games. We're going to get to see who teams really are. Coaches, they'll still experiment, but they're not going to be throwing out lineups that they wouldn't necessarily consider throwing out in a real game. And I think that's the beauty of it. We're a week away, less than a week away. So quick question for you, Lukas, before we sign off. First week, what's the biggest game you're looking forward to?
Butler, Eastern Michigan. I will be there. I mean, honestly, I think that's part of it. It's just like being in the gym for a regular season game again. It is going to be fantastic. I think it's the opening Friday is Wisconsin, Tennessee. That intrigues me from a kind of a barometer point for both of those teams. Like Tennessee, I think is a group that's coming in with some Final Four kind of aspirations, and we're going to get to see a really good litmus test for how much better a Wisconsin team that pretty much brings back everybody and adds AJ Storr from a team that missed the tournament last year. I think that's a big one. I think we see a couple. Yale goes at Gonzaga. I think Yale is going to be one of the better bin majors in the country this year. That can be an interesting game as Gonzaga's kind of coming into a year with a few more, a notable mustache missing. So I think there's a lot of some pretty intriguing opening round stuff in this first week.
It's WCC. Mine is New Mexico at St. Mary's on Thursday, because you've got really and you've got really high expectations, I think, for both programs. St. Mary's obviously notably higher expectations than New Mexico, but both have high expectations. And we're going to get to see the post Logan Johnson St. Mary's, right? Logan Johnson, Kyle Bowen out. You're expecting some freshmen, some other guys to step up. Josh Jefferson was my breakout player heading into the season for the WCC. I think that game is going to be a really good litmus test for both teams in terms of, where are they now? Not necessarily what can their reasonable expectations be, because it's still week 1, but where are they now?
Sure.
But I'm excited. I'm excited for Big East. I'm excited for West Coast basketball. I'm excited for what the new Big 12 is going to provide in terms of the basketball caliber of basketball they're going to have up and down that conference. So
I just need some basketball college in my life.
Oh, basketball college all day, every day. With that, we will talk to you next time. After we've seen some games, we'll have some great things to talk about, real basketball to talk about, and maybe adjusting some expectations based on what we see in some of those marquee matchups. With that, as I said, for my co-host, Lukas Harkins, I'm Connor Hope. We'll talk to you next time.
Basketball college. Basketball college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball college. Come on. Basketball college. Basketball college. Whoa, basketball college.